After 16 years managing their data systems, I was told I was stuck in the past and let go. You're no longer aligned with the company's future, Arthur. That's what Carl Mason, the new CIO, told me. His tone was polished, rehearsed, like he'd practiced in front of a mirror while sipping an overpriced oat milk latte. I had been managing the digital architecture of Weltings for 16 years, back when we were running backup servers out of broom closets and firewalls were literally a brick wall plus tape. Now, I was labeled obsolete. The cloud will handle it, Carl said with a smugness that made me want to punch a server rack. We're bringing in younger, more agile talent, people who aren't stuck in the past. I stared at him, blinked once, then again. My pulse felt like a drumline gone rogue. No thank you, no handover request, no consultation, just pack your things. The room felt smaller. My ears rang. I could see my screen still humming, scripts running, anomaly, trackers pinging quietly in the background. Tools I'd built, systems I'd held together with duct tape and sleepless weekends. Just like that, I was a ghost. A young guy with a lanyard waited outside my office door like he was guarding a vault. He wouldn't make eye contact. Probably some fresh hire Carl picked off LinkedIn. I logged off, walked out with a cardboard box and 15 years' worth of loyalty compressed into one bitter breath. As I passed the main server room, the one they now planned to decommission, I caught a glimpse of blinking blue lights, redundant arrays, physical nodes, a thing of beauty. They wouldn't know what hit them. And the cloud? The cloud doesn't love you back. Step 2. Reflection and backstory. The house was quiet that night. Maria made pasta and poured me a glass of wine without asking. She didn't say anything when she saw my expression, just reached out and ran her hand across mine. It was the gentlest mercy. No questions, no pity, just knowing. I stared at the plate but couldn't bring myself to eat. The steam curled up like a memory. It had all started in the summer of 2007. Weltings was smaller then, barely pushing past mid-tier status. I joined when they were still hiring techs who understood how to solder their own hardware. I was the second guy on their systems team. By year 3, I was leading it, and for 16 years I built their entire data architecture from the ground up. Weekends blurred into late nights. Maria used to tease that our router got more attention than she did, but she understood. She always did. There were birthdays I missed, anniversaries I postponed, vacations we never took. I promised her just one more rollout or one more quarter until things settle. They never really did, but every time something broke, when a ransomware threat blinked red at 3 a.m., or a regional hub failed to sync its logs, I was the one who pulled it back from the brink. No headlines, no applause, just a system that worked like breathing. Even when our daughter Lily was born, I balanced hospital visits with remote logins. I had a cot in my home office. My pulse synced to uptime dashboards. Maria used to joke that my blood type was RAID 5, and I did it all, without a whisper of complaint. Because it mattered. Because I believed in building something that outlasted me. And yet, here I was, unplugged. Not with thanks, but with disdain, like a relic. Carl didn't know the half of it. He wore smartwatches and spoke in buzzwords, but I had survived DDoS attacks that lasted 72 hours straight. I'd mitigated insider threats, rebuilt from outages, coded patches by hand when vendor support failed. The irony was almost poetic. The cloud, it's only as secure as the hands that set it up, and Carl's hands were all manicure, no calluses. Maria squeezed my hand again. Maybe it's time to rest, she said. I nodded, but deep inside, a flicker of something stirred. Not rage, not yet, just a quiet hum, like a server powering back on. The days that followed were unnervingly quiet. I tried to embrace stillness. Walks with Maria, breakfast with Lily before school. No beeping dashboards, no midnight alerts, no disaster drills running through my mind like muscle memory. But silence for me wasn't rest. It was reconnaissance. I started to observe, not just Carl, not just Weltings, but the whole industry. Most of my network assumed I'd been poached. When they reached out offering freelance gigs or startup CTO roles, I played it off. Taking a break, I said, consulting quietly. The truth? I was watching, mapping. Every public statement Carl made, every new hire announcement, every architecture pivot they blogged about, I logged it. Welting's switch to a fully cloud-based system wasn't just risky, it was reckless. They'd built it like a showroom, not a fortress. Flashy front-end tools, off-the-shelf cloud services stitched together like a Frankenstein monster. No one was monitoring the pipes, no redundancy protocols, no sandboxed test environments. It was like watching a toddler play with a loaded gun, and they had no idea what any of it actually did. I noticed they didn't revoke my admin credentials for several days. Sloppy. I didn't touch anything, but it told me everything. I needed to know. They weren't afraid of ghosts. That would prove fatal. One night, Maria found me in the garage surrounded by dusty equipment. Old servers, network drives, archived schematics. She leaned against the doorframe and raised an eyebrow. You rebuilding something? I looked up, half smiling. Just remembering. What I didn't tell her was that I was mapping the evolution of their systems over the past decade. I still had backups of their legacy architecture. Hell, I built half of it. I knew their naming conventions, their API calls, even their internal code names for test branches. Carl's team didn't scrub anything. They just paved over old foundations with new UI. I wasn't planning revenge yet. Not exactly, but I was collecting tools. I remembered what Maria said. Maybe it's time to rest. And I agreed. But rest didn't mean retire. It meant recalibrate. There's a specific kind of clarity that hits you when you're unplugged. You see not only what was taken, but what remains. Skills, access, leverage, trust. People forget that being indispensable isn't about title. It's about knowledge asymmetry. And I had it in spades. I began scripting again, not for deployment, just for memory. Testing old code against new environments, running simulations in isolated sandboxes. The systems I used to babysit had grown brittle. Too much reliance on third-party containers. Too many unverified open-source plugins. No internal checksums. No manual overrides. If something went wrong, they'd be locked out of their own infrastructure. They called it modernization. I called it fragility. The ghost in me smiled. Meanwhile, Carl kept posturing. On LinkedIn, he published a piece titled, "Legacy Thinking is the Biggest Threat to Innovation." He never mentioned me, but the implication was clear. His new team praised his visionary leadership. They hashtagged posts with Connor No Limits and Hteir Cloud is King. Cute. I joined a closed forum for ex-Welting's employees, most of whom had been quietly phased out when Carl took over. Their stories aligned. Veterans tossed aside. Proprietary tools discarded for trendy subscriptions. No transitional documentation. No real onboarding. They weren't bitter. They were watching too. I wasn't alone. Over time, I reached out discreetly to two of them, Nadia, who used to run infrastructure auditing, and Jeff, a former DevSecOps engineer. Casual chats at first, then pattern recognition. We started swapping notes, not about revenge, but about decay. Decay disguised as progress. At night, when Maria slept and the house was still, I sketched models. Not attack vectors, just fault lines, pressure points, fail-safes that weren't safe, logs that weren't logging. The more I mapped, the clearer it became. Welting's was standing on a digital trapdoor. All I had to do was wait for gravity. No anger, no drama, just entropy. By the third week, I had stopped feeling displaced. I was no longer a man cut off. I was a man outside the blast radius watching the countdown. And somewhere deep within me, the hum had grown louder. Not rage, not revenge, just precision. The silence of my home office was sharper now, tighter, more deliberate. A month had passed since Welting's freed me from the past. I spent it walking the dog, fixing leaky faucets, pretending to read. But mostly, I stared at code. Because here's the thing Carl didn't know. You don't give a man root access for 16 years and expect him to walk away clean. They'd revoked my credentials the minute I left, but I didn't need access to them. I needed access to what I built. Their new cloud migration, designed by some consulting firm Carl found through a TED Talk, was full of shiny dashboards, third-party dependencies, and outsourced support. But I knew where their blind spots lived. I put them there. Not maliciously. Back then it was just practical design. Emergency redundancy. Manual override points buried under layers of abstraction that only I knew how to reach. I didn't plant backdoors. I planted tools. And now, I just needed to start poking. It began small. Anomalies in internal invoicing. Weltings used a procurement automation tool I'd once helped them implement. I knew its quirks, its timestamp patterns, its approval workflows. A few subtle injections, ghost vendor profiles with immaculate credentials, fake consulting hours, obscure tech support charges. A vendor named Solence Metrics, billing $11,350 every second Tuesday. Their internal audit AI flagged it, then unflagged it after I spoofed a change in threshold parameters. Next, I ghosted a payroll anomaly. Weltings had 3 global divisions. Their HR software ran a consolidated pay framework, something I'd integrated years ago. I slid a fragment of code into the holiday pay module, enough to double pay out 5 executives during a non-standard fiscal week. Not enough to raise a whistle, but enough that finance would have to reissue amended statements. That triggered a vendor payment delay. That triggered a clause breach in one of their supplier SLAs. That triggered a penalty. And all the while, Carl was too busy running LinkedIn webinars on cloud-forward thinking to notice the accounting quicksand at his feet. But even chaos needs a rhythm. I didn't want the whole house to burn overnight. I wanted mold to grow in the beams. Quiet, spreading decay that no one saw until it was far too late. So, I attacked trust. Weltings was migrating everything to a hybrid AWS plus Azure stack. 2 environments, dozens of APIs, hundreds of endpoints, thousands of dependencies. Their DevOps pipeline was now a patchwork of vendor-owned keys, 2FA tokens, and managed container systems. But buried in the automation chain was a script I had written, an old Jenkins runner with deprecated access tokens that should have been revoked. It still worked. Through it I started duplicating encrypted backups, not stealing them, just relocating to a secure node in a jurisdiction with no data residency. Agreement. Iceland. I set the storage billing to a corporate credit card. I knew they didn't monitor closely. Every week, 40 GB of raw user data, metadata, logs, customer telemetry, left the company without a trace. They were bleeding information, and they didn't even feel the cut. Then I forged an internal SOC2 compliance scan. Easy enough. I mimicked the report format, altered the certificate date, rerouted the audit check into a sandbox environment, so when they ran a third-party verification, it looked clean. And Carl paraded the falsified compliance badge at a tech conference like it was his Nobel. It wasn't just sabotage. It was precision entropy. Every system I hit still worked. That's what made it terrifying. The billing system processed. The payroll went out. The backups triggered. But everything was just slightly wrong. Mismatched hash values. Minor checksum errors. Vendor payments delayed by milliseconds that, over time, built into operational lag. I knew the signs they'd ignore, because I'd trained them to ignore them. Carl started noticing friction, slow queries, confused accountants, unusual traffic patterns. He held an all-hands Zoom to reset expectations. But morale was slipping. One of the lead engineers took stress leave. Another got caught blaming the QA team in a Slack thread that mysteriously found its way into the CEO's inbox. I watched it unfold from my kitchen table. Sometimes, I'd take notes while slicing an apple. The beauty of entropy is that it doesn't scream, it rusts. But just to tighten the noose, I planted the catalyst. One email, sent from a spoofed procurement address referencing inconsistent ledger entries linked to Solence Metrics. CC'd to the CFO, the internal audit lead, and a concerned shareholder. I didn't sign it. I didn't have to. The audit committee convened 2 days later. And Carl? He finally looked nervous. This was only the overture. Weltings executive. Board gathered in their glass and chrome war room, floor 34. I wasn't there physically, of course, but I knew the agenda. I'd seen the calendar invite, scraped from a mirrored Outlook cache during one of my earlier probes. Subject line, urgent, ledger irregularities and audit trail review. Carl was in the hot seat. He opened with that confident PR-trained smile, the same one he wore when he fired me. But this time it cracked around the edges. He tried to explain the Solence Metrics billing chain, claiming it was a legacy vendor artifact. Then came the compliance badge. The CFO asked why the SOC2 certification had metadata showing it was last edited in Notepad++. Carl stammered. The board chair leaned forward, and then the CIO's screen froze. Because I froze it. Injected a 0-day packet flood into their conference software, Nothing damaging. Just enough to crash Carl's screen mid-sentence. When it came back up, his desktop background had changed. Just text, black on white. The cloud doesn't love you back. He yanked the Ethernet cable. They declared a cybersecurity incident that afternoon. Standard protocol would have been to call in the managed response team. Weltings outsourced that function last year to save costs. But the new provider? Their integration hadn't been tested. Carl insisted they run it live. It failed to initialize. I'd redirected the webhook endpoints. When their incident response team tried to connect to Welting's servers, they hit a simulation. A sandbox I'd built, hosting a mock version of their architecture. Every threat report they generated for the next 72 hours was entirely fabricated. In the meantime, the real damage was metastasizing, encrypted backups. Corrupted, not maliciously. Just re-indexed in a way that made them unreadable by Welting's current software suite. Their data? Intact. Their ability to interpret it? Dead on arrival. Finance couldn't reconcile Q3. Legal couldn't guarantee. GDPR compliance.IT couldn't explain why DNS requests were being rerouted through a Latvian proxy every third hour. Carl made one final play. He brought in an external white hat firm to sweep the system. Smart move. Too late. They found fragments, yes, but the infrastructure was already buckling. What they didn't find? The off-site data vault I'd set up in Iceland, now containing a mirrored log of every executive Slack message for the last 2 years, including some very candid conversations about layoffs, optics, and a quietly buried harassment complaint. I never threatened to release it. I didn't have to. Rumors began to swirl. Internal teams stopped trusting each other. Engineers pointed fingers at compliance. Compliance blamed the audit team. HR circulated a memo about digital hygiene that read like a panic attack with bullet points. Then came the leak. A real one, though not by me. A junior IT analyst, trying to be helpful, forwarded a redacted security report to a journalist contact off the record. The story dropped 2 days later. Welting's under internal review for financial irregularities and data mismanagement. Stock price, 17%. In 48 hours, investor confidence, gone. The board convened an emergency meeting. Carl wasn't invited. He was transitioned out by week's end. No fanfare, just a one-paragraph LinkedIn update and a generic farewell post liked by 12 people, most of them recruiters. The company bled. Vendors demanded renegotiations. Clients issued threats. One Fortune 500 partner paused all integrations, citing concerns over systemic stability. Maria found me in the kitchen the next morning watching a live feed of Welting's CEO issuing a carefully worded apology on CNBC. "You did this," she said softly. I looked at her. "No," I replied. "They did this. I just let entropy finish its job." She didn't argue. That night I opened my secure terminal and typed one final line of code, a release script. The Iceland node would wipe itself clean within 48 hours. No trace, no trail. Welting's would survive, maybe, but it would never trust itself again. And Carl? He'd spend the rest of his career explaining to hiring committees how he learned a lot from that cloud incident. It didn't happen overnight. Collapse rarely does. Welting's limped forward, a husk of its former self, bloated with internal memos and third-party audits. They hired a new CIO, an interim from a risk management firm with no tech background and a fondness for pie charts. He talked about restoring trust and agility in the post-incident landscape. The buzzwords returned, but the pulse never did. I watched from the outside. Quietly. I had no need to gloat. The ghost had done its work. Maria and I started, going on walks again. At first they were short, just around the block. My knees complained, my back resisted, but eventually the rhythm returned. She'd pack sandwiches. I'd bring an old paperback or two. We'd sit under a tree and talk about Lily, now almost in college, studying cybersecurity. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I started consulting. Not for companies like Welting's. I'd had enough of suits and transformation roadmaps. No, I helped small businesses, schools, public libraries, people who couldn't afford to be preyed on by the latest ransomware or gutted by an amateur cloud migration. I rewired servers in old buildings, wrote scripts that ran clean and lean, showed 15-year-olds how to spot phishing links better than most compliance officers ever could. There was something purer about it. Honest work, real needs. And slowly, the bitterness faded. Not completely. No. Some scars remain. Like phantom code left behind in a deprecated repo. But I stopped dreaming in error logs. I started sleeping through the night. One day, while sorting through old backups, I came across a folder labeled Legacy. Inside, notes, diagrams, source, trees, architecture plans I had once sketched for Welting's next-gen system. Before Carl. Before cloud-first nonsense. It was beautiful in a way only builders understand. Elegant, modular, resilient. I stared at it for a long time. Then, I archived it, encrypted, offline, mine. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's survival. It's living well enough that you don't need to look back, and building something better, not for profit, not for power, but simply because you can. That's the new order. Not one dictated by buzzwords or quarterly earnings, but by hands that still remember what it means to create.